Happy Sunday, Lighthouse. My name is Keith. I'm one of the ministry associates here at the church. I serve particularly in our youth ministry for the junior hires. This is a testimony of God's generosity to me. I only talked to him once, but the testimony of this farmer I'll never forget, because he is to me, in an immeasurable way, an example of what it means to make Christ, not money, our treasure. George Jackson was born on October 2nd, 1936, in California's Central Valley. He became a farmer, like his father before him, and operated Kingsburg Orchards near the city of Kingsburg. The family business raises and sells primarily fruit, hundreds of varieties of apple pears, peaches, plums, poulots, etc. In 2020, about 3 hours south of Kingsburg, I began my theological studies at the Master's Seminary. Through the Richard Mayhew Scholarship, my tuition fees and living expenses were covered. So I graduated in 2024, debt-free, and yet indebted to the sacrificial donors of TMS. Or rather, I should say, donor. Although I didn't know until halfway through, George Jackson was the one who funded my theological education. And not only mine, but also those of almost 100 other MDiv students, including one of our own missionaries to Japan, Seiji Kawamura, who we send off this week. Measured by his trade, Mr. Jackson was a farmer of fruit. Measured by what he treasured, he was a Christ lover, a father, a grandfather, and a great-grandfather. And to me, a trainer of men, paving the way for gospel ministers to bear eternal fruit for the Lord of the harvest. In October 2023, I and other scholarship recipients got to meet Mr. Jackson during a special luncheon at the school. He was kind, warm, humble, and in the best way, ordinary faithful. In our short conversation, he was still giving everything away. The secret to success was these V-shaped orchard trees that maximized sun exposure. He gave us baskets of fruit from his farm, and he gave thanks for the ministry that the Lord would do through us. He actually thanked us when we owed him tens of thousands. Just a year later, on November 18th, 2024, at the age of 88, Mr. Jackson entered in the presence of his God and Savior to receive his heavenly reward for loving his Savior well, for loving his family, for serving his church, and even for being generous to a bunch of TMS students, including one named Keith. Of all the things I learned in seminary, I learned most that I have been entrusted with the knowledge of salvation, entrusted with theological training, entrusted with relationships and resources. Mr. Jackson was not entrusted with pastoral ministry, but instead, God entrusted him with wealth. And he used that wealth for the gospel, so that now and forever, his generous life is bearing bounty, not of one gospel ministry, but of 100 times that. Mr. Jackson was a conduit, not a cul-de-sac of grace. He knew that he was blessed to be a blessing, entrusted with all things to make disciples of all peoples. And he reminds me that God has entrusted me with all that I have, so that I would give it all away in love. I have freely received. Shall I not freely give? However God chooses to use my life, as a friend, a counselor, a minister, a preacher, a pastor, it is in no small measure thanks to a farmer named George Jackson. I can't wait to meet him in his heavenly reward, but until then, he remains a shining example to me and to us of what it means to treasure not wealth, but Christ, the true reward.